Hello, in this video we're going to be reviewing the CSM Web Services and API, specifically the Cherwell SOAP API rather than the REST API, and we're going to be following along a use case of trying to access a specific attachment on an incident that has been sent in. So ideally someone is going to be emailing in a CSV into Cherwell and then having us process each line in the CSV and then do something with it, for instance, updating an employee record. So this was posted by Scott Spindler on the community forum, and apparently, so we're not going to go over actually processing the CSV because it looks like he knows how to convert that into an XML collection, which is great. It means our video is going to be nice and short. The second half of this is going to be actually using the SOAP API to get the CSV. So once that CSV is pasted as an attachment to the incident, which is going to happen as part of the email event monitor, we're going to have the email event monitor run a OneStep that then calls that incident and gets the attachment information for that incident. And that's what we're going to go over today. So we have a document, pretty old document, on the SOAP API, and the reason we're doing this through SOAP initially is because I've done this once before with SOAP, so it'll be easier. We may go over how to do this in REST later on, but in this case we're going to be working with SOAP. And the very first thing we need to do is we need to find out what our URL is for the SOAP API, and I'm just going to copy that. So this is it right here. The Cherwell web service is installed by the portal and browser apps installation. It's kind of called out here in this document, and if you want to, you can go to this URL in your browser. You can go to this URL in your browser and it will show you all of the different SOAP API methods that you have available to you. And we can also, if we open up Cherwell, we can access this, and we can, I'm in the wrong spot, we can use that URL for a new web service definition. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. Now our URL here is going to be localhost/cherwellservice/api.asmx. We're not going to set anything in security type. Our service type I'm going to leave as WSDL and then SOAP 1.1. And for our WSDL URL, I'm going to set this here. Pretty sure that's our WSDL URL. No, it might be... Yay! Alright, so when we look at methods, we should have a very similar list of methods as we have here. So essentially this is supposed to read in everything from that web service and give it to us as methods in Cherwell. And the reason that that's going to be convenient is we don't have to then redefine all of these methods. We're going to have more accurate methods built because there's not going to be any chances of us having these methods built incorrectly if they're imported directly from the service. It's great. If you're familiar with web services, when you go to build REST API web services, you kind of have to create the web service methods yourself, and there can be a lot of confusion on that if you haven't worked with them a lot. So I'm very happy that we have a WSDL available for this. I'm going to make login the default method. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to start working with a OneStep. I'm going to go ahead and create a new OneStep, and I just had to check for a moment to make sure I'm actually signed into the right system. I am. So this action is going to be named log into Cherwell via SOAP API. And the very first action we're going to have here, sorry, it's not going to be a decide between multiple cases. It's going to be a call to web service action. Here we actually have to select a web service, so that'll be our load Cherwell SOAP API/Cherwell web service definition here. We are going to store the result, the return code, and the headers as variables just in case we need them, and I'm not going to stop my OneStep on there. We need to select a method, and that's where those methods we were talking about earlier come in. We're going to be logging in with this action, so we've selected our method, and we now have parameters to use to actually send for this method. So we have user ID and password. These are going to be just your plain text Cherwell user account, user ID, and password. And since I'm on a local system that's not exposed to the internet, and it's a demo system. I just have the default CSD admin for my username and password, so I should be able to enter those when I sign in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a pop-up, and I'm going to include the result of this call a web service action. So first we're sending the return code, and then we're going to send the headers, and then we're going to, I'm saying send. First we're going to show the return code, then the headers, then the result. Basically, if you show this to yourself in a pop-up, just do these three in the reverse order, because return code's small, headers is a little bit bigger, but not quite as big as result. So you don't want to put the result first in case it's lengthy, because then it can be, very, very long, and you might not get to see what your return code and headers were. All right, I'm setting this to text box because text box allows you to select the text. So if there's any kind of error and we need to troubleshoot, we can copy it. Next, we're going to run this. Okay, I got a 500 error. I don't know what that error does or is for. We are going to try Googling it. At least I don't remember what that error is. 500 internal server error is a generic error suggesting a problem with the website server. Okay, so we got a generic error message. What we're going to do is we're going to try running this manually. Alright, so this works perfectly fine when we do it through the website, which means we have an error somewhere in our OneStep. We shouldn't have an error somewhere in our OneStep because we don't have that much that we could have screwed up here. We are going to go and check on our web service definition. I'm going to try setting this to SOAP 1.2 and see if that works. Okay, so apparently, I'm not going to say this is guaranteed, but apparently we needed to work with SOAP 1.2 instead of 1.1. I'm perfectly fine with that. So now we have a 200 success code. We have headers here, and I'm not going to look at those, but we also have a result text of true, and that means we're now logged in. Now, I remember in the past, every time that I ran an action using this web service, I logged in immediately and then I did my action every time that I ran the action. So I don't remember why I did that, but I'm pretty sure that your login here expires pretty quickly. I'm not entirely certain. So what we're going to do next is we're going to create an action under the incident association because we're working with incidents. And this is going to log into the SOAP web service, and it's going to retrieve an attachment. It's going to retrieve an XML collection of attachments for an incident. We're going to work with a couple of OneSteps in this video here. The first one is our login action that we just worked on. The second one is going to be this OneStep that gets a list of different different attachments for an incident. And the third is going to retrieve the actual attachment data from the incident using a specific record ID of an attachment returned in the second OneStep, which is this one. And then maybe we might just be able to work through a fourth that decodes that data if it's a CSV. I don't know. We'll see where we get. So our next action in this OneStep, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to log in. I don't know, at the point in time that this executes, you don't really have a way of knowing whether you're still logged in. And I think there's a web service action that can check it, but to me it's simpler to just relaunch the login to Cherwell OneStep we just created to log in to make sure that we're logged in. And then next, what we're going to do, I keep dragging decide between multiple cases. I use decide between multiple cases a little bit more than call a web service, so I think I'm just kind of in the habit of running that action. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to store some variables from a call a web service action, and the method we're going to select, I believe, is going to be labeled something along the lines of get attachments for business object. Here we need to send the business object name or ID. In this case, the name is incident. We also need to send the business object rec ID. So in this case, that would be our rec ID field. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a pop-up with this information. So again, I'm going to send the return code, I'm going to send headers, and I'm going to send the result to a pop-up. And after that, I'm also going to send the result into a stored value, because our very next action, our next one step, is going to use a stored value to parse the data from this one-step action. So here I'm going to create a temporary stored value, and I'm going to call it attachments for current incident. Now I'm going to mark this as user specific because I don't want a stored value to get overwritten by someone else running the same one step. It's not going to happen in this case because we're talking about something that's getting launched by an email monitor, but why not? If it's getting updated by a one step, I always click make it user specific. The only ones that I don't leave user specific are ones that are used for lookup values or something, like the current system stored value. All right, and we're going to set this to our call a web service result action here. And that's also pasted in our show a pop-up. So we are now going to run this action. And it's very important that we actually run this from an existing incident. I meant to create an incident, and I kind of forgot as I was explaining that last bit. So we're going to create an incident. We're going to select a random customer. We're going to take ownership. We're going to assign a priority. We're going to save that incident. And then real quick, we are going to create a CSV file. We're going to create a blank workbook. And I'm just going to put a couple of values in here. And I want to add a column header as well. Great. So that's everything for now, and then what we're going to do is we are going to save this, and we are going to save this under, yeah, I can leave this in documents, I suppose. We're going to save this with the name CSV for Cherwell SOAP Web Service Attachments Test. We need to save the type as CSV, and I'm going to select CSV, delimited. We'll click Save. Yes, I want to keep using this format, and then we're going to exit out of this. So now we need to attach this file. And for me, the easiest way to do this is to use the little Attach File option. I'm going to go to Documents, and now we've got our CSV attached. So the very next action for us is going to be to run our one step to retrieve that list of attachments. I think we have it right here, get attachments for incident. So we've got our pop-up letting us know that we have successfully logged in because we're running our login one step. And then here we have an escaped XML collection of attachments. Now it's kind of important to note that it is escaped out into the ampersand and LT semicolon and ampersand GT semicolon, but that's fine. We can convert that out to the XML if we needed to. So that means that this is currently sitting in a stored value, which is important because if I create a new one step, what I'm going to do is retrieve data for each attachment on incident. So now what this one step will do is the very first thing it's going to do is it's going to run the previous one step that logs in and gets the data from our attachments because, then we only have one action that we want to run if we need to retest this. And then once that data is populated into that stored value, we are going to bring it locally into a variable. We're going to label this as XML. And since our previous one step was setting that value into a stored value, we can retrieve that and put it into a local variable. I just have to find it. Now you'll notice I should have copied it out to Notepad. You'll notice it was sending that data out in an escaped format. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to replace those little ampersands and semicolons with the actual text. And I don't think we have an option for that initially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our old school replace function. I believe our LT, sorry, I'm screwing up on my keyboard, was our beginning tag, and our GT was our ending tag. So this will turn that into just normal, plain, unescaped XML, which is great. And instead of this just being XML, it really needs to be an XML collection so that we can step through it. And then what we'll do here is we'll step through that collection that we've defined in that previous variable action. And then we're going to label the current item variable name current attachment. Now here we need to actually do something with our OneStep. However, I don't have the format of that attachments list in front of me. I suppose we could look at it in our document right here. So I'll go do that. We should have, so here's retrieve list of attachments with a business object. I was hoping this document actually had like the format that was returned by it. And real quick, I'm just gonna run this other OneStep again. So we're gonna save this for now, and we're gonna rerun our get attachments for incident, and we're just going to copy out this data right here. And I love working with Notepad++, so I'm going to paste that data into a new sheet in Notepad++. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to replace those escaped values, so our ampersand LT colon, and well, that's going to get replaced with a starting XML bracket. And then we are going to change that L to a G, and we'll replace it with an ending XML bracket. And then here we can actually see what this looks like. And because we have plugins in Notepad++, we can do this. So if you don't use Notepad++ often, there's a plugin labeled XML Tools. It has a pretty print with line breaks option that will format a lot of the XML that you can get out of Cherwell. So here we can see we have an attachments XML collection. We have an attachment record. So when we do a step through collection, it'll cycle through every attachment record. And that's what's going to be in our current attachment variable. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to get the attachment ID, which is an attribute on the attachment record. So inside of our OneStep, what we're going to do, when we open that OneStep up again, is in our step through attachments, we are going to set a variable for our current attachment ID. This can be text. Now this is going to get set to our current attachment variable, which is defined here. This is an XML variable that holds, if you heard me say earlier again, this attachment definition. And we're looking for the attachment ID, which we'll retrieve using a modifier for string from attribute. And the attribute that we're looking for, fortunately, it copied everything that I pasted in there. The attribute that we are looking for is attachment ID. All right. And then once we have our attachment ID, what we need to do is we need to execute another call web service action, and we need to get the details for that attachment. So here's our Cherwell web service. We're not going to stop on an error. And what we're going to do here is we are going to call the get attachment web service action. This differs from get attachments for business object in that you send the actual attachment ID and it sends back the attachment details. It sends them back in base 64 format. So here we're going to send the current attachment ID, and then we're going to show a pop-up with the results of that web service call, because we still want to make sure that this is executing correctly. And here again, this is going to be a long message, potentially. The next action we'll have to take is we're going to store the data for our result in another stored value. So this is going to get set with our call a web service result, and that's everything that we needed here. Actually, I'm going to rearrange my variable action, which I'm going to name properly. And then here we are going to, this is labeled get attachment ID. This action is called get attachment data using ID. There we go. And the other thing we're going to do is the next action we have is we need to decipher the base64 content of our call a web service result into text. Now, I'm curious, and I think I mentioned this in our post on the community site, I'm curious about whether or not Cherwell in versions above version 9.1.0 can actually retrieve the base64 format of this file and decode it back to text, because we do have an option to encode and decode into base64, but it may not be in the same format. That we may not be decoding in the same format that it was encoded, so we're going to find out. So we've got our encode text option for base64. We're going to select decode. We'll click OK, and we're going to see what happens. So here we've logged in. We've retrieved our attachments XML collection. It hasn't been escaped yet. Oh, so we've got another error here. This time it says we're not logged in. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm just going to rerun our login action. I don't know why we're not logged in. It, like I said earlier, it can be a little finicky, so we're just going to rerun our login OneStep right before our get attachment using ID action. Now this I created under the none association. We'll run this again. So we've logged in, we've gotten our attachments XML collection. We logged in again just in case. And here we have, wow, that's not a lot of data. Here we have base64 encoded data for our attachment. It's very small. And you'll notice under this line, it didn't actually decode, which means we may not be able to decode it with Cherwell. Now, this is an XML element for attachment data. And then everything after that, GT, between that and this LT, is the actual, I'm just copying this out, base64 text. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to search for how to decode this information. So we're going to search decode base64 text. Okay, so this was able to decode it. I think the reason that we weren't able to decode it is because we have this metadata around it. There is an XML element for attachment data, and that's not valid base64. So we need to retrieve just the contents of that element, which are right here, and then our decode should work. So what we need to do is we are going to convert this to a valid XML. We're going to unescape that element right there, and that one right there. And once we have that, we'll just use string from element on attachment data, and we should get the proper value. I opened the wrong OneStep. So inside our step through collection action, what we're going to do, here we have our call a web service result. And the reason I like saving stuff to stored values, I'll just point out, if it's not too long, you can actually see the data show up under current value. The ampersands aren't showing here, so you have to be aware that's a slight bug. But you can actually get an idea for the format that this is saving in, which helps when you go into modifiers. So here, we are going to treat this as, we're not going to treat it as XML yet. Sorry. We're going to replace ampersand LT semicolon with our starting XML bracket, and we're going to replace ampersand GT semicolon with our ending bracket, and then we're going to treat it as XML because then it'll look like XML. And then we're going to use the string from element action for the attachment data element. That should filter out just that base 64 content right there. And then, well, yeah, actually, that's our base 64 content. This we will just, oh yeah, so no, we do still have to decipher it, so we're going to do that here. I was running that right against our local variable. Instead, I need to use our stored value before I put the decode on it. Yeah, I think this was the one. So then in our pop-up, we are going to encode text, base 64, decode, and we're looking for our CSV data to show up right here. So here we've logged in, we got our XML collection of attachments, we logged in again, we got our base 64 data, didn't decode. We're going to keep trying. Okay, so here our modifier for string from element didn't work. So instead of using as XML, at this point I'm just going to use a substring, not a substring. I'm going to use a text between action for get the text between starting attachment data and ending attachment data. I just realized the reason GT didn't work is because, or it's not that GT didn't work. When we pulled that data out, it didn't have, I don't think, the ending, never mind. The only thing we need to know is we're going to grab this data. I didn't properly add the end tag, I don't think. I don't remember because it's not actually on here anymore, but we'll find out. No, it is. I mean, it should be that guy right there. I was worried that I didn't have that little slash there. So what I need to do now is I will just tweak this one last time. We'll put in our / here. Login, XML collection, login. Ta-da! We now have a retrieved list of comma-separated, well, it doesn't show the commas, which is hilarious. We have our values. It doesn't show the commas. If you're using this and you're on version, I think 9.1.0, there's a way to get around that since it's apparently showing the items with just line breaks. You can use our, I'll show it to you here. I wasn't expecting it to not show commas. I wonder, it didn't show commas here either. Oh, the reason it doesn't have commas is I only used one column. So that's why. If we had multiple columns, then it would show commas. Great. So now that we've modified this, we can close it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rerun this, and now we should see, we'll have to re-upload our attachment. So you can ignore what I said earlier about not showing commas. That's just because we didn't actually, commas aren't shown between lines. So if you were able to process this, you would need to make sure you separated it by line, which you can do. There's a map out on the Exchange that will change line breaks into XML, which is fantastic. It's a map that we produced, and we have a separate video for it. But if you go out on the Exchange and you find line breaks to XML parser, you can process those line breaks. Anyways, if this is just CSV data that's not on separate lines like an actual CSV document, that's not a problem. So we're going to rerun this action here. True, XML collection, login again. Here we go. So you'll notice every row is a line break, and then every column is a comma. And that's how we get CSV data from an attachment, a CSV attachment from an incident. So this, you can use this to process your attachments on an incident, and using a OneStep you can retrieve the actual data from those attachments. This is only really going to work for text files like CSVs. If you put like a binary file on here, this doesn't work nearly as well because it'll be encoded in binary and you won't be able to retrieve the data for it within a OneStep. But for a CSV, this should work. So at this point, if you have multiple different attachments on your OneStep, you'll want to filter through those attachments to make sure you're pulling out the right one. And you can do that by checking the attachment type element. When you get to your attachment element inside of our other OneStep here, where we retrieve data for each attachment on incident, you would do it under this last OneStep. So where we're getting the attachment ID and then logging in and getting the attachment data and then saving it into a stored value. At this point, after you have the data for it, I would just say you can probably use a go-to action and just go all the way to the end here. And just, I wouldn't have it on a pop-up. You'd have some other action. I don't know if we can appropriately end OneStep execution without screwing up the whole OneStep if you have multiple attachments. But I would just put in a benign action like an update a variable action. Let's say right here. And we'll set a random variable to a value of nothing, just so that we have somewhere to put our go-to action to skip over everything in case it's not a CSV. And then our condition here will just be that a new custom expression with our variable current attachment with modifiers for as XML and string from element, and then our element is named attachment type. So we copy that and we paste it in, equals CSV, or not equals CSV. So if it's not a CSV, if this value right here is not a CSV for the current attachment, we're not doing anything with it. And then ideally you run this, it processes that CSV on your incident, and you then get to do something with the data after this point in the OneStep. So I'm not going to go any further in our video because we don't really know. Well, actually, I suppose we do know. If we go back, we can look at what Scott said he was trying to do. So his use case here is he would update an employee record with information on the line from the CSV. So he would be parsing data out from the results of this OneStep. And then, if that was a record ID or a name, he'd go to that employee record, and then he would update the data using other information from that CSV. So if you have many different columns, you could parse through it that way. And that's all. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to leave it in the comments section below, or you can reach out to us on our website. If you'd like to see other videos like this one, feel free to subscribe.